Outer Orange.
Today we are going to be talking about the best decks to possibly upgrade for Lyrical Monasterio, because we do have the Divine Lyrical Monasterio set coming out this week, so I thought I would talk about the best decks to upgrade. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, welcome in. So we're gonna basically go over some decks that I think if you really want to like compete or care about competing, these are probably the best options. I have three very strong decks, two that are like okay, and then one that's like an honorable mention. So that's kind of how we're gonna do it. We're gonna start off with Michu. I actually think Michu's insanely powerful. I've talked about her in a lot of my other a lot of videos. You can check those out around here. I'm not gonna go deep into details I have in other videos, because obviously I made a whole dedicated video about her. But basically this is a very good, very strong going first deck. It has a couple weaknesses, meaning mainly not finding her glitter portions to kind of make herself stronger. But this deck has an insanely explosive turn 3 versus many other decks. I think that's what makes it the powerhouse. It also can deck out, so be a little bit weary of that. It has kind of like a little bit of a toolbox with like kind of orders and which order you want to play into, and also be able to swap back and forth to get triple drive and even quad drive, along with your rear guards just being insanely beefy. This deck just hard slams your face in. Very scary deck, and I really recommend looking into it. Definitely, I think one of the best lyrical decks. There's one other one that's kind of up here with it, but I think this is one of the best ones if you want to just go full aggression and you just want to close out the game as quick as possible and you want to go first all the time. This is one of the best options. Next, we have Kyrie. Kyrie is, I would say, in a pretty good spot with the new mermaid line. Funnily enough, if you already own this deck, you really don't have to do a lot to make this deck better. Like, you just really need to change the ride line. If you have your deck at home and you've been keeping up with all the sets recently, all you have to do is change the ride line and you'll probably be good to go. Some people have been putting in like some interesting text and stuff like that, but realistically speaking, you don't even need the text. You can just keep it pretty mainstream. You can just run like you could just run all the good cards and you'll be good to go. You can like bump this up to 4. You don't even need Ura. You can run Ura if you're that fearful of like needing Forbidal. I don't think Forbidal is as necessary. I think you're fine without it, but these are just more defensive options. So these two right here, this is like a really good shield in your hand and all that kind of fun stuff to keep yourself alive. Very reasonable. I think if we're keeping Doji meta in mind, you don't necessarily need cards like these, but maybe a little bit more of like 10k shields kind of increments. So just something to kind of think about. But long story short, this deck's actually very annoying. I think its worst matchup is Nui, actually. So if you could just dodge Nui, this is a very powerful deck. You just bounce a bunch of cards, go into your grade 4. You can choose to go second with this deck and be okay. You can take second away if you're worried about stride decks. You can also just go second into decks that want to go first. So you can lose the dice roll and be okay, because this deck likes to go second. So it's one of those decks where if your opponent takes first away from you, you're fine. A lot of decks want to go first this upcoming format, so you going second into all these decks is okay. Just keep in mind you are gonna get beat down, and this deck does not deal with aggro very well. Next, we have Kyoka. Kyoka is considerably the strongest of this set. I would argue that Michu might be stronger, but some people were very hyping up this deck. This deck basically lets you set up for 6 attacks on top of bouncing cards back to your hand. Depending on how you play, you can play with that set to bounce cards back. You're going to be reviving your board over and over again with these 2 cards, and basically this deck got a direct upgrade from the old one. And the best part is about this deck as well, for similar with Kyrie, it's actually very easy to upgrade. If you already own this deck, all you're changing is the Kyoka to the new Kyoka, and you're adding in the grade 2. After that, if you already own everything, this deck's basically complete. You'll notice that every other card in here is from the old set. The only thing that's new here is like a PG, but it doesn't matter which PG you play, so it doesn't matter. This is from the old sets, this is from the old sets, this is from the old set. So if you already own everything, this is a very easy upgrade. And yeah, this deck just is a 6-attack deck that will constantly do the same thing over and over again. It deck filters pretty well, and just, it's just overall good deck. The fact that it revives over and over again means you can just have infinite perfect guards and kind of go down that route. I think this deck has a little bit of issue in terms of pressure. I feel like it's just the numbers aren't that great, but it is, it can be a powerhouse. And I think in this meta, the one we're going into, which is lyrical meta, this is a pretty good contender. And I'm done with the main decks. The main 3, like I mentioned, I think are these 3. I think these are the best options to go to, but I do have 2 kind of secondary options that aren't too bad either. The first one I mentioned is Leticia. I actually think Leticia is very powerful. Her issue is that she has no protection early on and she could randomly die. New Leticia is actually very powerful. Going into the new Leticia, your opponent's probably dead. It kind of feels almost like a Blackmire turn. It's very hard to live through it. It's like a lot of power, a lot of buff, a lot of there's 4 attacks, there's the Vanguard restanding. It's just a lot of pressure, and once they're at this point, you're probably dying unless you just double defense or T out, or if you healed early. Something along those lines is the only way you really get out of this turn, because it's a very aggressive turn. If you have some really high defensive shield cards in your hand, you could probably live through it, but realistically speaking, this Vanguard having basically 4 drives, giving 10k to your front row before attack is very brutal. It just does a lot. It does a lot. You do have to have the condition of having, I believe, 6 of these kind of cards in Soul. You'll get there, but it's you know, it's definitely not a card you can just straight go into. You have to wait a turn, which is like the downside of the deck. But it's actually very powerful. You deck filter crazy. This new card that you, when discarded, you get to bring her out, or if you play an order, you can bring her out, or you can discard her and draw a card. When you discard cards, it's just very, very powerful. This card definitely has made the deck better. This is our boosting card, and then obviously we have Bread Girl. She's back. This deck makes huge numbers. Also, its early aggro is insane. And also, it's less fearful of like removal. This list isn't running Yuika, but I would actually recommend tossing in 3 Yuikas in here. You could probably remove a Fed set, this card, and maybe one of these, and it just fit in Yuika just to kind of, you know, just stabilize the deck. The Yuika just makes it so you can aggro and then still get your cards back. And it's very powerful, and you don't always play for the 6 orders, so sometimes you just can just soul blast one of the orders and be fine. You will accumulate soul over time pretty quickly once you get to that mid to late game. But yeah, this deck's very aggressive. I would be very mindful of it. I also think this deck can get away with running the blue OT over the purple one, just because you're usually going Vanguard, Vanguard, Rearguard, Rearguard. Sometimes you'll go Rearguard, Vanguard, Vanguard, Rear, but it's not really that common to do that, so that I think the purple OT messes with that. But the good side of purple OT is it could potentially make you live an extra turn because it's a direct heal, so that's something kind of keep in mind with the purple OT. But I would argue that the blue OT is better actually, because that crit just matters that much. This is definitely a Vanguard-centric deck with insanely powerful rearguards on top of that. So definitely a really good contender. It's not the best of the best. The reason being it's a little bricky, more bricky than the other 3 that I brought up, so that's why it's a little bit lower. But it's still a very, very strong deck. I would still be very mindful of this deck. The other honorable mention I have is Coral. I'm not really the biggest fan of Coral, but I've heard a lot of people who are, you know, big lyrical fans kind of discuss this deck. It's basically like a stride deck because you get triple drive, you have like the crit pressure, you have the multi-attack, you can bounce cards. The only downside to it is you need to have all the corals to kind of do anything, and if you just don't see the corals, the engine kind of falls off. But it's really cool. I personally haven't spent too much time on this deck of putting it up here because I've heard a lot of people bring this deck up, and I do think out of our options in the lyrical set, this is definitely one of the better ones. Last but not least, I have an honorable mention. That's Chris Rain. Chris Rain isn't getting direct support necessarily this set, but so much next set. But I kind of just wanted to briefly bring this deck up. The reason being, if you're about to go and buy some of these decks, if you're really interested in Chris Rain, it might not be bad to be picking up her cards as well. So if you just happen to see something that, like, if you happen to be already shopping, this wouldn't be a bad deck to pick up, because set 4 is coming out pretty soon. It's about a month from this set, so in about a month we're getting this new card that helps her get an extra attack, and that definitely helps the deck's engine. So while you're shopping around, maybe you can pick up some of the orders, maybe pick up the Ballista Ride line, maybe pick up the energy cards, just to kind of help yourself out to make your life easier. I would look into this deck. There's so many ways to build this deck. It doesn't necessarily have to be one specific way, but I think the main point is having the restander in your arsenal and the fence sets in your arsenal. Everything else you can kind of move around. You don't necessarily need the stag rush. It's just useful. You don't necessarily, you do need the energy cycler, but yeah, that's basically that. So that's all I have for this video. I wanted to keep it short and simple and to the point. I want to keep it concise and kind of just give you guys some options of things you could be looking into. Keep in mind there are other decks too. There's also Mediel. There's Mediel Hazelet, I believe her name is. There's Leafa. I think this is a really fun set. I think my favorite part about this set, how pretty it is. There's Absolute Zero too, if you're interested in Absolute Zero or that mechanic. It's a very, very, very beautiful deck. I would say power level is not the greatest, but it's just a power level deck. There's a lot to look here. There's quite a lot going on in this set, but it's extremely pretty. There's just a lot going on. There's also Vert if you're interested in, if you have Prism and you want to just do a different version of Prism. So you got definitely a lot of options, a lot of things to mess around with. I just gave you guys what I think are the best options, aside from Kristen, because she's kind of more of a connect set thing. But there's a lot of stuff in here, and this is probably one of the prettiest sets that Lyrical has had ever, I would say. I just think this set is absolutely gorgeous, and I feel people are really missing out on the beauty of this set, because this is a very beautiful set. In case you do not want to buy old cards, just keep in mind you can just build Absolute Zero, because that one is basically built out of the box. And same with Coral. I just wanted to throw those two in there. Absolute Zero Coral can be built out of the box. You don't need the other stuff. It's nice, but you don't need everything from the old sets to kind of help you out. Keep in mind there are perfect cards in here. You may need the OT basically, but that's really it. So if you're interested in a deck that you may want to, but you don't want to invest super deeply into Lyrical, you can also go down the option. You can kind of, like, you know, put your foot in the water, see how you feel about the set, and then maybe look into some of these other decks that are running also older cards in them. So something to think about. But yeah, keep in mind Coral is completely out of the box. Like, the only thing in here is Eileen, and you don't even need that card. You can run something else in the slot. You don't need this card in this deck. Like, you notice here, everything here is basically new. So something to keep in mind. So up to you which route you want to go. But that's basically all I have for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope it was informative. 50cards.shop, code orange if you need any of your goodies. And let me know below what's your favorite Lyrical deck for this upcoming set. I would say in terms of just pure aesthetics, for me, it's definitely Absolute Zero. I absolutely love the Harpy ladies. Like, they are just absolutely beautiful looking cards. These cards are gorgeous. Let me know below what's your favorite deck aesthetically wise, or deck you like to play. In terms of playstyle, for me, it's definitely between Mewtwo and Kyoka and Kyrie. So one of those three for sure. Other than that, guys, peace out. So that's with that. See you guys in a future video. Bye.